and welcome back to Reading Rule, y'all. I'm Dr. Shay Parton, and this week we continue our 4-part deep dive into Carly Heath's The Reckless Kind. In today's episode, I'll be giving a mini analysis of place in the book. This one's going to be a little bit different than usual because Heath's book is a little outside of the books I have been reviewing in that it takes place outside of U.S. context, and it's set at the turn of the century. However, like most of the books I've reviewed, the place itself is as much of a character in the story as the people. I've never been to Norway, but I've seen some Norwegian films, so I feel like in my reading I relied on those experiences along with Heath's descriptions, of course. It's so good to center myself in the landscape. Though it isn't the only conflict in the book, the land and place drive much of the story of the book. After Fred, Gunnar, and Sigrid's accident, the Fuglestad's family is faced with the possibility of losing their farm. And the only recourse our young protagonists have is to win the annual winter horse race, which this particular year seems like an uphill battle because of a wealthy family in town who ordered a bunch of thoroughbreds, which are much faster than the fjord ponies that the Fuglestads would usually be running. One of the major things that place and time in this book has me thinking about is what we can learn from and do with the connections and disconnections that exist between its setting and our own experiences of rurality. For example, Asta describes Muskox Hollow this way. Muskox Hollow wasn't precisely lawless, but our constable lived as a farmer, and our aldermen claimed to put their attention to mending fences, not passing judgments. It reminded me, actually, of Cash and Delaney's argument when they arrive at Middleford from Jeff Zentner's In the Wild Light. If you want more information on that and you haven't watched the video, if you watch the video, this might make a little more sense. But there are a lot of commonalities surrounding the roles of people in a small town and how they get those roles. It also got me thinking about how policy and the rules of living in a particular place are influenced and shaped by the people in it. And then those people's identities are shaped by the place and policies. So there's like this recursive relationship that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think we can see it here. There are other parts of the text, especially at the end, where this is even more apparent, but I don't want to give anything away. So you'll just have to read it to find out what I'm talking about. Another important aspect regarding place that the text brings up is the way that places and spaces within small towns both unite and divide people. Asta runs into Fred shortly after the accident and discusses her previous non-interactions with Fred. She says, "Fred and I had only previously seen each other from a distance and never spoken directly before. Though Gunnar was my favorite person in the whole world, our friendship was confined to the schoolhouse and playhouse, and we never met each other's families. The Fuglestads didn't attend church after all, and they lived so very far outside of town. And unlike Gunnar, Fred had never gone to school. Instead, he accompanied his mama as she maintained hooves and hammered bar stock." So the physical location of the Fuglestad farm is a direct reflection of their outsider status within the culture of the town. And those boundaries are only traversed in places within the town that are equalizing spaces, like the school and the theater. But because Fred didn't frequent those spaces, Asta never directly interacted with him, it also demonstrates a difference between working class folks and laborers and the educated, which is interesting because those kinds of things still exist today. So if you think about college versus trade school, or academic tracking and the different diplomas that are available, which makes me think back to my conversation with Melissa Wyatt about how ridiculous it is that the dominant narrative surrounding working class folks is that they don't, can't, or won't enjoy the arts in the same way that the elite do or will. Place is also directly connected to family and identity. The cedar that Asta, Gunnar, and Erlend buy is their place, where they can be who they are, with all of their flaws, and still be accepted and loved. Because Sigrid was buried on the farm, the family's roots there run so deep that losing it would be more devastating than just the loss of the land, animals, and jobs. Asta, in thinking about the loss of the Fuglestad farm, says, "Saving the Fuglestad's farm wasn't only about Fred's livelihood and his family's animals. If we didn't save this farm, his mama's bones would belong to someone else." So that deep connection between place and identity and personhood is really apparent in this book. Also, moving across farm and town spaces and in and out of the roles of the only farrier's apprentice, Asta acknowledges the differences in the ways that people behave around and toward her. She says, "By now, word had surely spread of the deviant children who'd escaped to the mountain to live on their own, and I prepared myself for the stares I'd likely receive from shopkeepers and other townsfolk." So the farm is again on the outskirts and a more welcoming place for outsiders. Another example of how place reflects and supports the identities of the characters. While this book takes place in a different nation, in a different time, the way place works to help us understand the characters and their positions with Hestel in society is very similar to the way things still are today. And that's kind of disheartening, I think, but also demonstrates the importance of asking students to engage with historic representations of rural places to get them to think about progress, what that could, should, and has looked like, and how they can be part of it in their own communities and lives. Well, I reckon that's it for today. Join us next time for my reaction as a rural reader. Y'all come back now, would ya?